If you want to know which Evomon units are actually worth using in Roblox Evomon, this tier list will help you build a much stronger team. Evomon may look like a simple creature collecting game at first, but once the battles get tougher, choosing the right units becomes a lot more important. With different elements, strengths, and weaknesses to consider, you can't just throw your favorite Evomons into a team and hope for the best. So today, we're ranking the Evomon units from the ones you definitely want on your team to the ones that are better left in the collection. We'll be looking at how each unit performs and, most importantly, which Evomons stand out for their specific elements. Whether you're still building your first team or you're already hunting for stronger units, this list should make it much easier to decide where your resources are worth spending. So let's jump straight into the tier list and find out which Evomon units are truly worth catching, training, and evolving. I'm quickly moving on to the video and I'm ranking units in Evomon. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Mopillo, Glassitador, Twelby, Sylvanark, Leafblade, Clamspire, Tinkor, and Churphantom. The C tier is basically where good intentions go to retire. These Evomon can still get the job done, especially if you're progressing through the story, but once you start comparing them to the stronger options in the current meta, their problems become pretty obvious. Starting with Mopillo, this one is actually pretty comfortable to use early on. Its neutral matchups and reasonable durability make it a decent support or filler pick when you just need something reliable on the team. The problem is that normal offers no super effective pressure, and modern tanks bring much more sustain, control, or coverage to the table. Mopillo is not terrible, it just feels like it showed up to a modern fight carrying yesterday's toolbox. Glassitador has a similar story, although its early game performance is a little more impressive. Its solid HP and ice coverage can make story battles against grass, flying, ground, and dragon enemies surprisingly easy. The problem starts later, when Frostseer farms better and Frostel offers much stronger control in player versus player battles. Once you reach the endgame, Glassitador is basically asking, "Do you still need me?" And the answer is usually no. Twelby is another Evomon that can look pretty appealing during early progression. Getting access to bug and flying coverage quickly gives it some useful matchups, and for a while it can definitely earn its spot on the team. But then the weaknesses start piling up, and its late game payoff simply isn't impressive enough to justify dealing with them. Twelby isn't necessarily bad, it's just incredibly easy to replace once you have access to better options. Sylvanark at least has a straightforward job. It works as a serviceable early grass attacker and can handle water, rock, and ground encounters without forcing you to hunt down some incredibly rare catch. That's a nice quality of life advantage. Unfortunately, the competition is brutal. Terragon, Daytunymph, Thordlord, and Frostel all offer stronger grass-based win conditions, so Sylvanark eventually gets pushed further and further down the priority list. Then we have Tinkor, which actually has a legitimate defensive niche thanks to its steel resistances. It can make certain ice-heavy or rock-heavy progression fights noticeably smoother, and that alone gives it some value. The issue is that Clankster now performs the durable steel role at a much higher level. Tinkor doesn't have enough offensive pressure or utility to take over long fights, so once Clankster enters the conversation, Tinkor suddenly looks like the budget version nobody asked for. Leafblade is perfectly usable if you're going through the story and want a simple starter style option. Its early water, rock, and ground coverage can get you through plenty of encounters without too much drama, but it gets outclassed surprisingly quickly by wild grasslines, and in current ranked play, its lack of sustain and utility becomes a serious problem. It can absolutely help you get started, but it doesn't give you much reason to keep investing in it later. Churphantom is at least easy to understand. It's an accessible flying line that gives you useful coverage against grass, bug, ground, and fighting enemies, which can be handy during the earlier stages of the game. But Sunderkrane is cheaper to finish, while Volcrest is massively stronger in the endgame. That leaves Churphantom stuck in an awkward middle ground where it isn't bad enough to avoid completely, but isn't good enough to make you excited about building it either. Finally, Clamspire tries to make things interesting with counter-style play and basic water coverage. It can still steal some favorable matchups in the early and mid-game, especially if you enjoy playing around the opponent rather than simply smashing everything with raw damage. Unfortunately, its damage and sustain fall behind Bubblade and especially Myrofish as you progress, so while Clamspire can definitely have its moments, those moments become harder and harder to find once the stronger water options start showing up. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Vpark, Empixie, Pebgolem, Fluffastar, Blasmane, Spicumane, Sundercreen, Starmuse, Gempress, and Bublade. B tier is where things get a lot more interesting, because these Evomon aren't just sitting around waiting to be replaced. Most of them can put in some serious work, especially during progression, but the problem is that their ceiling becomes much easier to see once you start comparing them with the monsters dominating the late game. Empixie is one of the most practical fire lines you can pick up during the early and mid game. It's easy to start building, fast enough to keep your progression moving, and with a strong roll, it can stay useful for quite a while. The catch is that Lavarok is simply bulkier and more consistent in endgame modes, so Empixie usually ends up becoming more of a secondary attacker. Still, if you need a fire Evomon without wanting to make your life complicated, Empixie gets the job done. Fluffastar is basically the Evomon equivalent of bringing a reliable hammer to a toolbox. It's a straightforward early tank with rock damage, it's cheap to get online, and it can fill some important coverage gaps while you're building your team. Unfortunately, its late game ceiling isn't anything special, and the current sustain heavy meta gives you much better places to spend your defensive investments. Fluffastar is dependable, but eventually you start looking for something that can do a little more than just absorb hits. Pebgolem is another solid progression wall thanks to its reliable bulk and counter utility. Its matchups into fire, flying, and ice can make it surprisingly valuable while you're moving through the game. The problem is that its weaknesses are pretty easy for opponents to exploit, with water, grass, ground, steel, and fighting coverage all causing serious headaches. On top of that, Terragon, Mirefish, and Clankser all scale better into the later stages, so Pebgolem can feel more like a temporary bodyguard than a permanent team member. Viparch brings something useful to the table as a poison attacker, especially when you're dealing with grass teams or opponents who don't have a good answer to status pressure. It can absolutely punish teams that underestimate it, which is always satisfying. But Wisvex and Chitaladin simply provide more utility while fitting into a wider variety of teams. That makes Viparch difficult to justify as a maximum investment project when stronger options are available. Blasmane deserves some credit for being arguably the best starter when your main priority is getting immediate fire coverage. It's comfortable throughout the story, and its burn pressure gives it more staying power than the other starter lines. However, the honeymoon doesn't last forever. Empixie becomes available fairly soon, while Lavarok completely outclasses Blasmane once serious endgame content enters the picture. So Blasmane is a fantastic starter, but not necessarily the Evomon you're going to be bragging about several hours later. Spicumane has a pretty simple job: be the ground specialist you can actually get your hands on before the rarer endgame options become available. It gives you an accessible way to answer electric teams and can handle its role well enough during progression. The problem is that Fordlord and Goliath eventually arrive with more bulk, better coverage, and stronger sustain. Once those options are on the table, Spicumane starts looking less like the final destination and more like the bus you took to get there. Sundercreen is a surprisingly efficient flying option because it doesn't demand a huge investment and still gives you useful grass, bug, ground, and fighting coverage. That makes it genuinely handy during progression, especially when you just need a versatile unit that can cover several matchups. But then Volcrest shows up and makes the comparison rather painful. Better speed, better damage, bleed, and much stronger late game relevance make Volcrest the obvious upgrade in almost every similar role. Starmuse rounds things out as a solid psychic specialist, particularly when you need an answer to poison and fighting teams. It has enough utility to earn its place on a roster, and it can definitely contribute when the matchup is right. Gempress also deserves a mention here as a respectable bug damage dealer that can punish psychic teams and perform well with a high quality role, although fire flying and rock counters keep it from climbing higher. And then there's Bublade, a worthwhile starter for anyone who wants immediate water coverage. With a committed build, it can still perform even at higher levels, but Mirefish is simply the much stronger long-term water investment thanks to its superior sustain and utility. So across this B tier, there are plenty of good choices, but most of them come with a very clear "until something better shows up" warning label. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Datanymph, Frostseer, Chitaladin, Astrachnite, Boltonia, Wisvex, Wisbrain, Fordlord, Clypexo, Coulomtis, and Goliath. Now we're getting into the Evomon that can walk into a serious fight and actually make the other side nervous. A tier is packed with units that can carry progression, dominate specific matchups, or remain valuable deep into the endgame. They may not have the ridiculous consistency of the S-tier monsters, but several of these can absolutely look like S-tier when the right team and build are behind them. Wisbrain is a great example of a unit that can snowball a fight once it gets a safe attacking window. As Season 1's Light King, it has already shown enough in player versus player battles to prove that it's more than just a flashy title. Clip-Exit is another major threat, bringing strong dark damage, ranked potential, and excellent synergy with premium traits like Energy Leech. The catch with both is that they really care about the quality of the build. A perfectly built Clip-Exit can feel oppressive, while an average one can feel like it forgot to bring its batteries. Fordlord also deserves some clarification because the old Mudthorn placement didn't tell the whole story. Once the evolution line is completed, Fordlord becomes a strong anti-electric bruiser with useful bulk, seed bomb sustain, and much better scaling into the late game. Goliath follows a similar philosophy, giving you a bulky ground and light option with strong bossing value and a great answer to electric heavy teams. Both are more about roll compression than raw speed, but that slower pace can become a problem when ice, water, grass, or flying coverage enters the conversation. Wisvex remains one of the most useful status and utility attackers in the game, combining poison and psychic coverage with trait-driven pressure that can crack grass tanks and punish teams relying too heavily on sustain. Frostseer, meanwhile, is one of those Evomon you can throw into repeated player versus environment farming and feel pretty comfortable about. Frostbite stacking, useful area of effect damage, and excellent matchups against dragon, flying, grass, and ground make it a fantastic ice carry. The downside is that Frostel brings more control in player versus player, while Frostseer's fire, rock, steel, and fighting weaknesses make blind picking it a little risky. Columtis gives Season 1 players another very respectable electric option, with enough ranked performance to justify building it for the long term. If Archapex or Cyan Knight isn't available, Columtis can absolutely fill that gap. Boltonia can do something similar, offering strong standalone electric damage and a solid speed profile for both progression and matchup focused player versus player teams. The problem for both is simply competition. Archapex, Cyan Knight, and Columtis are all fighting for the same electric spotlight, so Boltonia needs to bring something special if it wants to steal the show. Chitaladin is the kind of Evomon that makes you question your early game decisions because the final evolution is dramatically better than the slow start suggests. Its sturdy status-based playstyle lets it check grass and psychic targets while remaining useful in longer player versus environment and player versus player battles. Data Nymph is much more accessible and flexible, offering grass coverage, psychic debuffs, and useful sustain from the middle of the story all the way into endgame teams. Astruc Knight rounds out the A tier as a powerful fighting attacker that can delete normal, rock, ice, and steel targets when you need immediate burst. It is still absolutely worth using if you already own one, but Pomash offering better priority while being free means Astruc Knight is no longer the unquestioned premium fighting choice. And that's really the theme of A tier. These Evomon are all good enough to build around, but the competition has finally become strong enough that simply being powerful isn't enough anymore. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Lavarok, Terragon, Volcrest, Archapex, Pomash, Frostel, Myrafish, Siang Knight, and Clankser. And now we reach the part of the tier list where the Evomons stop asking for a chance and start demanding one. S tier is reserved for the units that can genuinely shape a team around themselves, whether through absurd sustain, ridiculous damage, incredible utility, or the ability to make an opponent rethink their entire strategy. These are the Evomon that you look at and think, yeah, I probably need one of those. Cyan Knight is one of Season 1's clearest winners in ranked player versus player, and it earns that reputation through more than just hype. Its electric and rock pressure gives it excellent coverage, while its strong tempo lets it threaten common water and flying picks before they can settle into their game plan. Archapex is still an incredibly reliable electric carry thanks to its speed, consistent damage, and coverage against water, flying, and steel, but Cyan Knight now gives it some very serious competition. The downside is that both can have a very bad day when ground types enter the room, and Cyang Knight's seasonal acquisition makes replacing a great copy much more painful. Terragon remains one of the safest defensive centerpieces you can build around. Its full HP damage reduction combined with Seed Bomb sustain allows it to win opening trades, survive pressure, and drag unprepared teams into fights they absolutely did not want to have. Mirefish takes the same general idea and pushes it into another direction, with enormous sustain that can repeatedly bring it back to full HP. That makes it one of the nastiest PvP walls and a very dependable PvE anchor. Of course, neither is immortal. Ice, poison, grass damage, anti-heal style pressure, and focused burst can expose their weaknesses, while Mirefish in particular wins slowly and isn't exactly going to speedrun your farming sessions. Clankser is another defensive monster that feels like you're trying to defeat a second health bar. Its defensive typing, staying power, and performance in both player versus player and boss content make it one of the safest investments introduced in Season 1. Frostel, meanwhile, has climbed dramatically and for good reason. Seed Bomb sustain, access to sleep, and grass and ice coverage give it actual win conditions in ranked player versus player, while also letting it handle ground, water, flying, and dragon targets. The problem is that Frostel's dual typing comes with a rather impressive weakness list, so fast fire, rock, steel, or fighting pressure can ruin the party before its sustain engine gets started. Volcrest continues to be one of the best all-purpose damage dealers, and Wing Combo's bleed pressure is especially valuable in a meta where everyone seems to have discovered the revolutionary strategy of simply refusing to die. Its speed and coverage also make farming runs much faster, giving it value well beyond player versus player. Lavarock brings a more bruiser-focused approach, combining strong fire damage with natural bulk and fatal rebound style counter pressure that punishes opponents for attacking carelessly. Both are incredibly reliable, although Volcrest needs to respect rock, ice, and electric attacks, while Lavarock has genuinely rough matchups into water, ground, and fighting. Pumash proves that you don't always need gigantic stats to be terrifying. Combo Punch Priority gives it something that raw damage cannot replace, the ability to finish a weakened enemy before they get another turn. That makes it one of the best free-to-play progression investments and a dangerous player versus player finisher, although its average defenses mean it doesn't want to take unnecessary hits. Finally, we have Frostel standing as perhaps the biggest climber in this entire rebuild. Between its sustain, sleep access, and versatile grass and ice coverage, it has transformed into a genuine ranked threat. So whether you're looking for a defensive wall, a fast carry, a brutal finisher, or an Evomon that simply refuses to leave the battlefield, S tier has something for you. These aren't just strong picks, these are the units that can define the entire match around themselves. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.